Hey, welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. Have for you Chapter 7 of Book 4. Like, subscribe, comment down below, share the story with those who you think may enjoy it. Chapter 7, The Rolling Fog. Despite their best efforts, someone slipped through the screen. This revelation came to light when the first artillery shell hit the fake trench line, blowing apart a long dead horse and reducing a fake pillbox to rubble. Every human knew it was one of their own who had gotten through, and the mortars of First Cab started ripping fire into the surrounding wood line to try and flush them out. The artillery fire lasted for nearly 5 minutes as rounds rained down one after another. Some fell short, some fell long, but the auxiliaries kept their heads down and did their best to not give away their position. Ammunition must have been limited for the artillery as the rounds slowed to nothing, but Yule sent out his combat engineers on their own duty, knowing that most of the attention was going to be on the main line and not the side road. The LPs and OPs were pulled back and thrown out along the flanks, their main job being to catch anything trying to move around the town, instead of waiting out in the snowfields for enemy recon teams. The men and women of First Cab dug in and got ready, expanding their fortifications where needed in order to weather the assault the humans kept saying was going to come. A full day passed from the first artillery shelling, and many members of the Lone Wanderers were hanging out near the now large caravan of merchants that had made an ad hoc trade ring outside the city. One such wagon was a mobile bakery manned by a halfling that had bought the secrets of a dish called pizza and was currently serving up piping hot pies with the help of his Kilnir helper. The little glistening drake had been quite popular amongst the humans, all of them watching the frilled salamander-looking creature move and push red-hot coals where they needed to be, or tapped a clawed hand to a symbol that told the halfling to add more wood. It was here that nearly 30 lone wanderers were mingling, having declared the day the perfect day for a pizza night, and were joined by a few scattered soldiers from Ramella's own guard. Cassidy, a human from the southern states of America, was idly chewing on a slice of pizza while watching Lacune and one of Ramella's German troopers talk. He turned his head towards Willie and the others who were chatting nearby. "Hey, where's Yule been all day? Usually he's out running around doing commander stuff."
"Talking with Reich,"
Willie said, folding his slice of pizza pie to better keep the toppings in place.
"Romella was in there with him too."
"What is Romella doing in there?"
Dalek asked aloud, still recovering from scorching his mouth with cheese. Alaska shrugged.
"She was probably bored. Faye woman went off on a long trek when we first got here and only got back today. Was muttering about something she quote-unquote left behind during the Faye War and showed back up with a goddamn box."
"What do you mean she showed back up with a box?"
Prinz asked, still feeling the after effects of having a bullet wound healed up during the mortar exchange in the snowfields. He kept randomly squinting in pain from the pangs.
"Long box? Short box? Stout box? Black box? Box with labels? God, would it fucking kill you to give me a little detail."
"Just a box. Said she had to meet someone too, whatever that means,"
Alaska said, taking a large bite of his pizza and chewing for a moment before nodding his head approvingly.
"Not bad. Not too sure about these little crunchy pickled things, but they aren't offensive."
Moose chuckled from his crate seat, already halfway through his own pie. "You know how it is. Pizza is like..."
Yeah, we all get it."
Ben chuckled, though he was struggling with getting a cork out of a small bottle of wine. Alaska reached over, taking the bottle with a free hand.
"Here, let me get that for you, Rat."
"Speaking of Fey women up to no good,"
Ben said, speaking in a quieter tone as he jabbed a thumb over his shoulder.
Anyone ever figure out what is up with Lacune?
Yeah, man, he's just a cool dude with long hair.
Alaska said, removing the cork from Ben's bottle with a sharp pop. Molo shrugged, chewing quickly and inhaling the cold spring air to avoid burning his mouth. He swallowed, then sighed out happily as he pointed towards the human.
I don't know about that. I was just talking to them earlier because they volunteered to join the rest of us combat engineers. If you ask me, she's just riding the G.I. Jane line. The fuck do I care what they are?
Huff said with a gruff laugh, taking a slug from his own bottle before placing the cork loosely back into place.
I'll tell you guys the same thing I told those idiots who wanted me to help them confront Ramella for being a fae. I do not fucking care. I have only to woo and elves to bed. What matter is it to me what some other human is?
Nyla Fireheart, having just been passing by after buying some supplies in Limstory, kicked out a foot and whirled around, coming down to sit beside Huff on the little edge of the crate he was sitting on.
Well, I don't know about that. You humans are going to be a rare commodity if this war ever ends. Are you sure you don't want to find you a nice little human gal and make a bunch of little human pups? Well, I don't know about that. You humans are going to be a rare commodity if this war ever ends. Are you sure you don't want to find you a nice little human gal and make a bunch of little human pups?
Ugh.
Huff grumbled, pulling his elbow away from Nyla as he was not a huge fan of the brim-touched race.
Do you know the ratio of men to women with surviving humans?
Nyla stared at Huff for a long moment, and Huff shook his head, gesturing at her with his half-eaten slice of pizza.
It's high.
Why would I go after a human over here? There's brim-touched like you, Yamato, elves, Oni, dwarves, a plethora of exotic choices. There's no point indulging in a flavor I was forced to have back home.
Fritz said to Nyla, halfway through rolling a smoke. Nyla laughed in a tittering way and leaned up back onto her feet, dusting off Huff's shoulder and making the human lean away from her again just for fun.
Yes, that may be. They won't be full human. A pure human child born on this side of the veil will be akin to a mythical creature. Mark my words, humans are going to be more valuable than even the most powerful king or queen. Mark me, I say.
Yeah, you're marked, merchant.
Roxanne said, waving her off with a hand. Lacune walked back over with the German trooper behind them, who had given up his old and worn Wehrmacht field uniform for the floral shirts the more modern humans were wearing, and waved over to Molo.
Hey, this guy says he has a pretty good idea to get those trees removed.
Oh?
Molo said, his head perking up instantly.
Even with our lack of explosives?
Lacune waggled her hands, her own purple and pink floral shirt catching the oven light oddly.
Well, sorta kinda.
We are going to shoot it, he said eagerly, clapping his hands and then rubbing them together. You have rockets and a puma. That is all we need.
Not to mention you will be under the ever-watching eye of Yule here.
Ramella said, finishing up her long diatribe to Roach with a flick of her hands, pointing them to Yule.
No more orc incursions, no naughty gnolls raiding your larders, and merchants will feel cozy and safe with the outpost nearby. Plus, think of all the technological advancements your town will enjoy. Hot water in the home this far north? It would be a paradise.
Yule, arms crossed and eyes reflexively rolling as Ramella gestured to him, nodded to Roach. Your town will be under the protection of Gosling Company, yes. You will also have priority on technological advancements and better terms for payment for those rights.
Payment for those rights, you say?
Roach said, hands steepled in front of his face as he lay upon his ground cushion, and he rolled his head from side to side a few times.
You intend to collect some form of money off me, is that correct?
Ramella snorted.
Ugh, New Sanrion just built an entire school after paying Yule their yearly dues. You'll have plenty to go around.
He actually paid early this year, Yule said, scratching at his chin. I'm not looking to take advantage of you, Elderman, but this is a give and take situation. I give you protection, you help fund the army that provides it. Not to mention, those who enter into these contracts with me will be able to both afford and have the right of operating fuel-powered machines. Roach slowly dropped his steepled hands as a distant, thunderous boom echoed out across his town.
We will have access to the machines?
You will, Yule said, whirling a finger from his crossed arms. Everyone else is going to have to make do with what they can invent on their own. However, all vehicles of war, like mine, are firmly held under contract, starting all the way back with Prince Focket and his father, Thane Snorri Elwrench. This goes double for any vehicle that burns fuel, which is also controlled by Coco and I. Elderman Royce snorted lightly, placing both his hands down onto the top of his desk.
Huh, I see. You hold sway under a powerful monopoly of which, if I were to join you, you would then allow me to access things that others would have to... What?
What do you mean? Yule asked, eyebrows raised in polite curiosity.
I mean what I mean.
Roach said calmly.
What is to stop someone from stealing your ideas, your fuels, your vehicles? For how long do these luxuries last until one day a competitor comes knocking at my door?
Yule nodded in understanding. Ah, I see what you mean. Well, of course there are the courts themselves in which we do things the right way, as these contracts are lawfully sealed by Yethis and Orden themselves. However, should someone still risk the might of these gods and the wrath of the courts, we'll take care of it. Roach's flesh prickled at the tone Yule took with the last of his words, and the stagling felt that this human would likely take no issue in taking care of such a problem. Roach was no fool. He had seen what the vehicles could do, and even just having an area here where he could refit and refuel these things, along with the protection the army would bring, would be a major boon. Not to mention, the farming villages around him would likely love to have access to the trucks alone, if not to pull plows or haul goods to his town.
If I were to purchase these vehicles, would I be able to give them out on loan as I see fit?
Roach asked Yule, his eyes slitting with the cunning of a man who had mercantile on the mind. Yule chuckled. Of course, as long as the vehicles come back to you and are kept registered on your contract panel. Do take note that we are not going to do something silly like tax you again on the vehicle or some other such thing. Once you buy them, they are done in terms of costs except for fuel and upkeep, which will fall onto you.
How many other towns or cities have entered into such an agreement with you?
Roach asked, now looking quite pleased as his mind buzzed with all the ways he could mark a profit off of this venture. Every major town and city within the Confederation has entered into the agreement, Yule said, gesturing towards one of the many maps on Roach's walls. Fathdori and Imilnoris were the first and have remarked on their savings in terms of no longer needing to maintain their own militaries. The dwarves and Oni still do, mind, but they are simply taking their savings from no longer having to maintain the roadways with patrols. The towns along the roadways all have a small outpost on them and have been enjoying the luxury of a very mobile military unit that can deal with threats. Their satellite villages also enjoy this, as even though they are miles away, they can still have a quick response to harassment from both bandits and raiders alike. Roach looked at the map Yule had gestured towards and slowly moved his eyes along the roadways.
So you are, for all intents and purposes, a true warlord.
How do you mean? Yule asked.
You're handling combat and war for the entire Confederation, if I'm hearing things correctly, and collecting tithe for those under your canopy of protection.
Roach said with a cheeky smile.
You control the roadways with an iron fist of black powder and steel wheel. Have outposts in every major city, every major town, and along every major trade route.
Yule scratched idly at his chin in an aloof manner. Armies are expensive.
Indeed,
Royce said.
I have heard of the great tollway in Tueka.
Ramella giggled.
Easy coins that. To be fair, we did build a bridge.
Or two, Yule muttered. Old ones couldn't support the weight of our trucks, but even with the new bridges, our welcome has been frigid.
That's because you threatened the status quo in already barely stable land. They have a fish out the ones that fell in.
Ramella asked Yule, turning to look up at him.
That settled Sov was hauling around a lot of ammunition when it fell through.
Yule sighed. No, the mud has taken it and we can't get it out. But the Yamatu got most of the crates.
How do the nobles feel about this? Or the Renden Nung?
Roich asked, now sitting upright on his pillow with the discussion of new bridges having piqued his curiosity. Yule turned away from Ramella. The Pendulum and King Shay Rendan have been paying their dues equally, as well as any other noble whose town comes into our purview. While we expected a little bit of pushback from the nobles, they have found a lot of freedom when it comes to what they don't have to worry about anymore. Road upkeep, patrols, maintaining a small military force, all reduced down to paying a small fee. Not to mention access to things like advanced plumbing and any other advancement we formulate.
I see.
Roich murmured, slowly folding his hands.
And you are planning to spread this kind of contract further north? I can see such a thing being very popular in the Highlands after all the loss and devastation caused by the orcs.
To a degree, Yule replied. I may only offer it to the capital to the north.
You mean Chopstall?
Roich asked. Yule shrugged. I assume. I'm meeting the Serbnians near there at some place called Walhume. Roich drummed his fingers on the top of his desk, looking at Yule carefully from under the strands of the woven plate draping he wore in between his horns. He was quiet for a short moment, then folded his hands back together.
If we manage to survive this particular incursion, I will consider your deal.
All I can ask for. Yule said with a polite smile, while beside him Ramella grinned with glittering canines.
He's been the first to ask about the loaning of vehicles.
Ramella said chirpily, plucking out a cigarette from a small silver case she pulled from her shoulder pocket.
I can already tell he is thinking up some way of making money with them to offset the costs of paying you.
Yule nodded, pulling out his pipe and filling it with a small pouch of the local vice. He's going to be a crafty one, but I don't see any harm in what he may be planning as long as he follows the rules.
You mean the rules I helped you write? Because your handshake deals were something else.
Just take the W, Rommel.
Horrible, even.
Rommel. Ramella chuckled from beside Yule on the porch to Hackholmes, the two having retired there after speaking with Roich at length. Yule got his pipe lit, looking out towards the current quiet trench line. You think it'll be enough? He asked, taking a slow draw from the ember-filled bowl. Ramella took a drag from her cigarette, blowing the smoke out through scarred, thin lips.
Truly, if you and Coco keep an iron fist on the roads and lead with your military, the rest will fall in line and keep paying.
Do you think they might rebel, buck the contract, and try to take back control? Yule asked her, raising a brow towards the short Dracanic Fae. Ramella chuckled out with smoky laughter.
At some point you'll be the largest body of armed military hardware. Even if there is a rebellion, you'd squash it flat. Mines and nobles and councils will have access to buying weapons and vehicles via your arrangements. But even then, I don't see it happening.
Why is that?
You're scary.
Yule chuckled. True. I wonder where you learned such tactics, Rommel.
I refuse to give that man any credit. He learned everything from his bold parents.
Ramella said with a snort, taking another pull from her cigarette. She blew a perfect smoke ring and smiled at it.
You'll have plenty of money. Bring Troika to heal, and you'll have all the land and soldiers you need.
What about the rest of the lands to the west? Yule asked. Ramella shrugged.
Don't need them. There's enough resources on this continent alone to keep you swimming in iron and steel. Everything else you can find to the north and south in the Frost Mountains or swimming in the ocean.
You seem quite confident of that statement. Yule murmured, blowing a puff of smoke out through his nostrils as the Fae took a drag from her cigarette. Do you mean this entire landmass or just the eastern part of it? This place seems to be partially bisected by a series of lakes. Ramella said with a nod, savoring the smoke in her mouth and lungs before blowing it out.
My apologies. I forgot the war caused it to split. You'll be fine here in the southern part. This is a huge land. Entire world is larger than yours. To the west of the lake are the older lands where the Fae lent it in force from our island.
Your island? Yule asked.
We sunk it.
Ramella said with a wave of her hand.
Queen didn't want the others getting their hands on it. We landed there and took to war after we scoured the other continent clean. It was rather short on population anyway. Wasn't much of a fight after we obliterated the cities.
Yule twitched his eyebrows. Charming.
You two need to solidify your holdings here in the south, both in the Confederation and Troika. Become warlords, pay no heed to the calls of nobility or politics, destroy my kind in battle, and then...
Ramella said, but her voice slowly trailed away, her face setting bitterly. Yule swiveled his eyes towards her, and he knew what she wanted to say. He pulled his pipe from his lips and tapped the stem on his knuckle. And then rebuild our lives?
Yeah,
Ramella said quietly, frowning curtly.
I guess we'll all try. Again.
Yule chuckled. Second time's the charm?
I suppose.
Ramella said with a sad, sighing laugh as she flicked her cigarette.
I always liked Troika. I may try and see the cousin lands for a bit. Find a little cabin to rest in for a while.
Yule went to reply, but heard running in the distance down the snowy street, and they both turned to watch as Specialist came panting into view, the knoll's breath making little plumes of fog in the sky like the trail of a steam train.
The pup returns,
Ramella said under her breath, eyeing the knoll with open Fae disdain. Yule thumped her on the shoulder with his fist. Be nice. They volunteered.
Yule, Specialist comes with word,
Specialist called out, panting out happily as he came to a stop before the steps of the porch. The gnoll folded his hands behind his back, doing a rather good rendition of a parade rest despite his deteriorated legs and feet. Yule smiled in appreciation at Specialist, while Ramella snorted and rolled her eyes, taking a drag from her smoke. Come on up here, dog soldier, Yule said, working in the English words at the end of his tonka. Ramella snorted again with a scoff, while Specialist thought that Yule had called him something special.
Specialist brings word of logs being cleared,
Specialist called out, quickly jogging up the steps and holding out a letter to Yule.
The way is being cleared.
Yule reached out and took the letter, then gestured towards a free chair beside Yule. Have a seat. There's some wine if you want it.
Yule.
Ramella chided, squinting an eye at Specialist as the gnoll quickly took a seat and poured a cup of spiced wine. Shush. Yule muttered at her, reading the letter with quick eyes. Appears your lads are using some German ingenuity and American perseverance to get the logs cleared. Ramella stared sourly at the gnoll across from her, her lips wrinkling in obvious distaste at how Specialist was noisily drinking the wine.
Yes, well, they've been bored, I suppose.
And loud. Yule said, Rommel, they're going to attack us tomorrow if they know we're blasting our way out. I need you to ready the volunteer force.
Gladly.
Ramella said, casting Specialist another foul look before flicking away her cigarette and ambling down the steps.
I'll get them ready to go this coming morning.
Yule nodded to her. I'll be there to address them. Thank you, Rommel.
Uh-huh.
Ramella said, then took off at a languid jog towards the humans that were still hanging out near the merchant wagons. Specialist turned to Yule, his chin fur slightly red due to the splashed wine from his drinking.
She seemed nice.
She warms up quickly. Yule said with a reassuring smile, then poured himself his own cup of wine. So how are you doing? Are you and the rest of your fellow gnolls figuring things out? Yes, Specialist said happily, and Yule could hear his tail thumping on the back of his seat.
Humans are all very nice. All Knoll are well fed, well watered, and well ready for battle.
Yule gave an expressive look of, all right then, into his wine before drinking it, then set the cup down on the table. How is leadership treating you?
Well,
Specialist said again happily, smiling with bright teeth at Yule.
have never known such responsibility before. It is good to take care of own people.
Yes?
Specialist has found much joy and satisfaction from it.
I can't agree with you there, Specialist. Yule said with a chuckle, smiling at the sound of the long claw of Noel's tail still thumping on the chair. Leaders should always try and take care of their people. Specialist leaned forward, his hands clasped together.
Yule has led for many years, yes?
Yes. Yule said with a nod, reaching over and grabbing Specialist's cup to refill it. The Knoll's eyes brightened to nearly tears again, and Yule pointed a finger at him. Don't get weird. I just don't want you to go thirsty.
Yule does not mind, no?
Specialist asked him, watching as Yule poured the wine into the cup a full measure. Yule shrugged. I don't see what I have to mind. In my eyes, you are just a really hairy trooper. Specialist took the cup gingerly, as if this cup was far more important than the one before, and Specialist looked down into it with pensive eyes. Yule watched him for a moment while he sipped his own cup of wine, then cocked his head at the Knoll. Is something wrong, bud? He asked. Specialist's ears perked up, flicked, and the Knoll looked back up to Yule.
Is Specialist your people?
Of course, Yule said with a snort of a laugh. You and your fellows are my people for as long as you work under my orders. Specialist nodded.
Leaders take care of their people.
Leaders take care of their people, Yule repeated, reaching over and giving the Knoll's shoulder a shake with a laugh. Don't worry about it, bud. Leadership comes naturally. Don't worry about it. Specialist sipped slowly from the cup, this time bringing his lips to it and drinking as normally as he could. When he had, he held the cup out near his chest.
What makes a good leader? A leader like you.
Yule's true smile slowly drew away to a tighter, more false smile. He breathed out through his nose with a puff of cloudy air due to the frosty night, then sat back in the chair. Yule sat there for a long moment as Specialist watched him warily, his eyes wide and monitoring the human for any signs of violence or lashing out. Though after a few minutes, Yule took another drink from the cup, then set it down on the table in front of them. I don't know what makes a good leader, bud, Yule said quietly, lacing his fingers together on his lap. There are not some great words of wisdom that truly nail down what I think being a good leader means. There are a lot of them, but I don't think any of them are universally true. Specialist sat quietly in front of Yule, his ears folding backwards and forwards due to the tone of Yule's voice. Yule pressed his lips together, then turned his head back to Specialist. Some of our great warrior generals had some thoughts. Some believed a good leader depends on how high they bounce after they hit the bottom, to do what is right regardless of how it may make you look. To attack the enemy and never let the minds of your men falter. To have the confidence to stand alone and make the tough decisions. But me, as long as you are doing your best for your people and always keep the best interest of your men in the forefront of your mind, that's good enough. Just do the best you can, no matter how big or small it may be. Yule said, then picked his cup back up and touched the side of it against Specialist's. You'll figure it out. All good leaders figure it out in the end. It's not easy, but it is something that becomes simpler the more you stop thinking about yourself. Specialist nodded his head up and down.
These are good words.
Yule just chuckled, shaking his head back and forth a little. Thanks, bud. Now drink that wine and report back to your fellow gnolls. There's going to be hard times tomorrow. The special task team was sent off during the twilights of morning, and Yule was only woken up from his sleep by the knocks on the door to see them away. By laying on flat sleds pulled by 2 staglings apiece, 2 squads were sent off to the darkness to try and decimate the artillery. Most of the troopers sent off into the snow-filled void were humans, but a few sharpshooters and bow experts were sent off with them, one that Yule knew was named Helena. He remembered her from Tallwheat, but he was surprised to see her wearing an eye patch. Yule was still sitting on the stump he had sat down on after sending them off, watching their shadowy forms trail off into the distance until they could be seen no more. The morning sun was just starting to warm his face when he heard bootfalls in the snow behind him, and he slowly turned his head until the figure came into view. "Good morning, Captain," Yule said quietly, turning away from her to stare back out at the rail marks from the sleds. Captain Yethis stepped forward until she stood beside Yule, looking down at the human with a pensive face.
Good morning. You were out here early.
"I guess," Yule said with a shrug, turning his head and finding himself looking into Captain Yethis's pearl-white eyes, the sun catching the little flakes of orange in her irises along with her coppery hair. "You bringing me news?" She nodded.
Enemy troop movements were spotted by harpies an hour ago. They'll be on us here in 2 hours.
"Great," Yule said with a sigh, leaning up straight and setting his hands on his knees. "How are you doing?"
Me?
Captain Yethis said with a quirked brow, and took her hands from behind her back to fold them in front of her instead.
How do you mean?
Yule shrugged a shoulder again. "You know, how are you doing? Holding up well? Troops happy?" Captain Yethis stood there for a moment beside Yule, raising her head to the morning sun, then exhaled out her nose.
I'm all right.
"Just all right?" Yule asked. Captain Yethis took her turn in shrugging a shoulder.
Spoke with my sister for a while before we left. She's been quiet, considers me a traitor. I thought father could worm her out of her shell, but she is still well within the hold of the Fae. She has never been the same since she received her gift anyway.
"How are you and your troops?" Yule asked.
They believe they are finally on the right side for once. Our allegiance change towards the Confederation has given quite a few families the impetus to flee north. Though with the movement of our homelands, they are having to arrive by ship or take the long way overland. They are eager to redeem the southern elves in the eyes of the other races, but they are a small faction indeed. I would wager only 10% of the southern elves have turned their backs on the old ways. Ironic that we southern elves turns towards the light, while most of the orcs have let old hatreds fuel their way to the dark.
Captain Yethis murmured, then folded her arms across her chest.
Though a lot of troops, both southern elf and orc, are not fond of this cat-and-mouse form of combat. They would prefer to meet in battle, hand to hand on the fields.
Yule turned his head as he barely heard the distant thump of the last tree being blown away, then a staccato rhythm of machine guns. "I know it sounds a bit trite at this point, but I believe your men are going to get their wish."
How do you mean, Yule?
Captain Yethis asked him, turning her own head to see what Yule was looking at. Yule stood up to his feet with a short grunt, then leaned backwards, crackling his lower spine as he sighed out. "I know what I would do, and seeing as to how whoever is commanding these people is doing everything by the book, I know what he is going to do."
Care to share with the rest of the class?
Captain Yethis asked, giving Yule a polite smile. Yule didn't smile back, motioning for her to follow him as he slowly stepped out into the snow. "We are entrenched. And as far as I'm aware, they believe we are entrenched on the proper side of the wood line."
What would the proper side of the wood line be? I thought we were in a fairly good location.
Captain Yethis said as her boots crunched in the snow beside Yule. "We should have been on the edge of the woods facing the snowfields, not further within. I drew back to dampen the effect of their artillery and to hide our true emplacements. Yule said, pointing out to the line that was only 100 yards away from the town. We'll be fighting amongst the trees, which, while it may be a small issue for us, will be a major issue for our enemy. As it is, they will shell us heavily, and walk it around a bit to really grind in their heels. Then they will shell us with smoke to mask their movements. Captain Faditha smiled smugly.
As that may be, you don't have magicians to move the smoke?
Yule grumbled groggily to the southern elf, stopping in his steps and turning to face her fully.
You silly human.
Captain Faditha said with a short bark of a laugh.
If they do smoke us, you can just blow the smoke away. Have one of the warcasters just do a simple air spell and push all the smoke to the left and right of the lines.
Yule stared at Captain Fadithas for a long moment, in which her smile faltered slightly. She smiled again brighter when a curt smile of his own broke across his lips. I keep forgetting that, Yule said, then chuckled tiredly to himself. I was all in a down mood because we are downwind, and they know that. Captain Fadithas tucked her hands behind her head, beaming at Yule as she inhaled proudly.
Shank for your thoughts, Rustblood.
Actually, yeah, Yule said quietly, his eyes seeming to come alive with a thought. Can you guys make explosions just happen on the ground and stuff? I've seen you throw them around a few times. Captain Fadithas puffed out a breath of contempt.
Of course warcasters can. They just target the ground itself. Why?
Deep the gunners to the line!
A dwarf staff sergeant bellowed out as the barrage began to slowly crawl towards the tree line from the snowfields.
Brace them in the banks!
Multiple Oni and dwarf gunners ambled forward with the large, long-barreled rifles on their shoulders. These massive rifles were large, blocky weapons designed by the Brim-Touched and manufactured by the dwarves of Shur, and did not function like a regular rifle. Firing a massive 15.5 by 115 millimeter round, the magazines only held 4 of the shells, and were mounted on the shoulder instead of being held against it. This helped compensate for the weight, and were also designed to be fired from the shoulder even while prone. Most odd was the weapon's massive muzzle brake, reducing recoil in conjunction with a reciprocating barrel that aided in the ejection of the shell. The only issue was anyone standing beside the gunner had a high chance of going deaf, as the muzzle brake was rather loud and did not allow this weapon to be stealthy. These rifles were the gap filler for vehicles that had armor, but were not worth the wasting of a Belcher round, and were about to be tested for the first time in combat after only a few months in development. While these stout gunners slammed magazines into their weapons and made ready in the trench line, others jumped in with them bearing either rifle or spear. Gnolls paced themselves out all along the line, giving those around them an edge in melee in case anything actually got through. A lot of the gnolls were extremely nervous due to Yule being on the line with them, staring through glaring eyes at the snowfields as the rounds slowly pounded their way towards them. Are you sure they are going to look convincing? Yule asked, turning his head slightly so Molo knew he was talking to him. Molo nodded.
Well, besides putting bodies inside of them and giving a burst of red goo, I think they'll do the part.
Yule nodded, then turned his head the other way and raised his voice as the artillery became louder. All right, First Sergeant Caine.
Ready, Yule.
Erinda Caine called out, her fingers already slick with blood, along with 5 other warcasters that stood along the line, keeping their eyes locked on their targets. Wait till a round lands close to your targets, Yule called out, slowly crossing his arms as auxiliaries looked on with open worry at the advancing artillery. Sell the hit. The thunderous claps of the rounds coming in were quickly followed by the thudding boom of the warhead detonating, throwing snow and wet earth into the air in great gouts of white and dark brown. Most of the renegade orcs were rumbling in their ancestral throat singing, which said they were both expecting to die and or were utterly terrified of what was coming towards them. Everyone else hunkered down within the line, shoulders bucking with each strike as the artillery walked closer, but not so afraid that they had to tear their wide eyes away from the sight of it. A round struck right in front of a false bunker, and Yule snapped his head towards the warcaster responsible for it. "Now! Do it now!" he bellowed, and the warcaster clapped his hands together. The bunker detonated in a huge explosion of air, throwing chunks of rock, wood, dirt, and a mock-up of concrete into the air and across the snowfields. "First Sergeant, keep a close eye," Yule called out as he jogged away from her to keep watch on the other warcasters, making sure they did not flinch and ruin their moment to sell the destruction. A round fell just beside Erinda Caine's target and she snapped both her fingers, barking out in Kakuma. The mock-up of a wooden pillbox exploded with a concussive boom of flames and shockwave, throwing timbers nearly 10 feet long through the air like they were matchsticks. The boiling fireball curled and roared up into the air, staining the sky with the smoke of burning cover, wood, and what little of fuel they had shoved into it. Yule called out again as more artillery struck the false trench line directly, and 3 other explosions rippled through the air, mixing oddly with the booms of the artillery. Humans leaned down as shrapnel and splinters whizzed and buzzed through the air, while green auxiliaries hit the deck completely, screaming out as the shells continued to track along. "They're walking it along the false back line," Yule bellowed, cutting his hand through the air with a slash of his arm. "Take cover and prepare for indirect fire." When a round howled through the trees and detonated against a thick trunk, the trench line was splashed with splinters, causing Egg to scream and dive down behind a pillbox. Why she was there, no one knew, but she did still have the mind to bring her rifle.
This is insane!
Egg wailed as another round came howling down from the sky to rip apart a wall of the trench, throwing snow, earth, and wood both across the trench line and into the air.
This is fucking insane!
The good part ain't even happened yet!
Prince called out, then quickly ran over to grab up Egg and drag her into a notch in the walls of the trench line, both dragging her out of the open of the gun line and into cover before the next shell came down. It came nearly the same moment they rounded the corner of the trench wall, screeching down from the sky and turning the spot 6 feet from where Egg was laying into a new patch of defilade cover. There was a lack of screaming and crying, and Prinz leaned his head around the corner as Egg curled up on a crate of ammo, knees together and head buried under her arms.
Oh, well that's lucky.
Prinz muttered as 7 auxiliaries coughed and blinked through bloodied faces, having come out of the artillery strike without major damage. He waved at them, switching to his limited tonka.
You shit yourselves?
A male renegade orc spat out a mouthful of snow, blinking through the blood trickling down his face and mixing with his travel painting. "I'm going to pretend I fell in mud." Prinz chuckled, then ducked behind the corner as another tree blew apart from an artillery round hitting it. Wooden shards and flakes of bark rained down onto Egg, and she squealed, drawing herself into as tight of a ball as she could.
I want to go back to writing books.
Egg cried out, tears of terror carving dirty lines down her cheeks.
I don't want to be out here anymore.
Little late for that. Yule barked out as he strode purposefully down the line, only his eyes giving a slight twitch when a shell fell from the sky to tear apart the snow and dirt. "You leave now, you're gonna get shredded by shrap." Egg went to run out of the trench, but was quickly tackled to the ground by the human woman with the seafoam gray hair.
Let go of me, Andorra!
Egg shrieked, clawing at the ground and digging up furrows of soil.
I'm going back!
Stop moving!
Andorra screamed as she covered Egg as much as she literally could with her body, shoving the other woman flat to the ground.
Stay still, you idiot! You're going to get yourself killed!
2 rounds hit the trench at the same time, the concussion cataclysmic and straddling one of the actual pillboxes and ripping through a few auxiliaries in the process. One person was lifted from her feet, and you'll recognize the orange curls even through the haze of smoke and falling snow. "Nellie!" Yule shouted as he sped into an instant sprint, diving and catching the woman before she hit the ground. Nellie's eyes were wide as she collided into Yule's arms, and her still intact hand slapped itself to her left shoulder, the bloody stump a ragged tatter just below the bicep.
My arm!
"Medico!" Yule bellowed, lifting Nellie up onto his shoulder as he began to run to where he knew the little medical station was. "Medico, now!"
My arm, where is it?
Nellie said in a panicked groan, looking around with wild eyes as she tried to reach out with her tattered stump.
Yule, do you see my arm?
A renegade orc boo, their shamans and healers, came running down the trench line, her white facial paint already stained with arterial spray.
I'll take her. Give her here, warlord.
"Get her arm tied off and taken to the surgical tent as soon as the artillery stops," Yule commanded, turning his head and spitting as another tree exploded and rained splinterous shards down onto them. "Can you stabilize her?" The orc grunted, puffing a breath of air out of her nose.
I am a boo. With me, all things are possible.
"See to it," Yule said, handing Nellie off into the strong arms of the orc.
Yule!
A voice rose up from the line, and Yule spun around as the orc started trotting off.
Smoke!
Yule stepped up to the ledge of the trench and popped his head over, looking out into the snowfields. While the high explosive artillery was dwindling down before it struck the town, there were smoke rounds now landing one after another in the snowfields. "Already figured out your lanes, have you?" Yule muttered to himself and unshouldered his rifle as another tree exploded and groaned, splitting in half and keening as it fell away. "You're in for a fucking surprise, homeboy." And that's the end of Chapter 7 of Book 4. Remember, if you like the stories and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Garbro's Field Desk. Tell your friends, tell your buddies. If they just need something to fill their ears and help their workday go by just a little bit faster, this is the place for them to be. Huge shout out to our members. Memberships get sneak peeks and other such things, and they get to see early art access first on the Discord and other little discounts they get on the coffee. The first appear are the first shirts. They give $50 a month, if not more. I realize some of them give more than 50. I just never realized it before I actually saw it now. Like, oh, they actually give more per month. But to the big shout out to the first shirts, that's E Machino, Cody Jero, Death's Dancer, and Insane Medic. These guys help keep the VAs paid, help keep the metaphorical lights on and all that fun stuff. And they've really been helping out the channel for years now. Like, these guys have been here since 2023, early 2023. They've really helping the channel out. Next up is the E4 Mafia. These guys give $25 a month, and a lot of them same way. Actually we got 2022 here too. I just realized that. Damn, we got 2023s and 2022s. The old guard in here. That's the Great Baguette, Sonic Arrow, Splug the Goblin, Snitty Enjoyer, Dark Side, Kiwi Bastard, Lacune, Josh Beatty, Matty Boy, and Crusader 0625. And of course, we can't forget the Snuffy Squad. These guys give $5 a month and just help keep things going and shore up the spots where things get through. That'd be Croman, Karina Kestrel, Henry DM, Da, Lek Jules, Blonde Lord, Thrace Vega, Devin Schonholtz, Andrew Ingill, Yeti Potato, Skelters, Kite Zero, Classic Cthulhu, Ranger Uninspired, Diesel Dog, Coffee Commander, Anto, Inquisitor Matt, Duncan D, and Ein, the Lore Smith. And until we see you this time on this side of the veil, that was Hailey, that was Simba, that was Technoward, that was Rue, that was Fire, that was Amanda, that was Vynn, and this is Garbro's Field Desk. We'll see you next time.